It looks like another Davis grad. UC Davis is about 75% of our speakers, I think, today. He's also a licensed civil engineer. Please help me welcome Tom Gohring.
All right, how's the food settling? Are people already getting sleepy? I guess is really the question. It's the dreaded after lunch doldrum period. So if I hear some snores, we'll just ignore that. We'll just keep moving. Thank you, Ken. I'm Tom Gohring. I work for this really interesting organization called the Water Forum, and it was created in the mid-90s as an attempt. Is that for me? Actually, can I get a gin and tonic?
I just wanted to say there's still plenty of food over there, so if you're getting a little sleepy, maybe you need something more to eat.
Here you go. Yeah. Pack it in. Exactly. In the mid-90s, a bunch of the water managers in the Sacramento region, Sacramento, Placer, and El Dorado counties, decided that maybe they could get more done in terms of water management if they negotiated some kind of a truce with the environmental interests in the region. And so they set out to do that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the truce, talk about what it's meant for the region, talk about some of the activities that has led to. I actually gave an update very similar to this to the Sacramento County Board of Supervisors a couple of weeks ago. And Supervisor Jimmy Yee said, "Water Forum? Is that the same Water Forum that helped out with the East Bay mud deal?" And I said, yeah, we're still around. He said, you guys are still. And so I think it begs the question, why do we still have a Water Forum? Because it has led to some real advances in the region. Are we done? Can we be done? And possibly. I mean, when the reality is, when this thing called the Water Forum ceases to be a value to people in this region, it really ought to go away. My continued paycheck notwithstanding. But this is the reason why I think we've continued to exist for the last 13 years. One is that the Water Forum Agreement included some key commitments. Commitments from between water agencies, commitments between water agencies and the business community, commitments between the water folks and the environmental folks. And I think those organizations continue to honor those commitments and see value in working towards that. The Water Forum has led to building some really lasting relationships. Relationships, again, within caucuses and between caucuses. And those relationships, I think, end up saving us money in the long run. The Water Forum is something that is well known even outside of our region. People hear about the Water Forum, they've read about it. Other regions have created their own Water Forum. I think the Kings River area has a Water Forum now, and I think the Stanislaus River region has tried to develop a Water Forum. And the continued existence of us demonstrates to the rest of the world that this region is getting their act together. They're taking care of their own business and making sure their house is cleaned up. And finally, because we have people involved in water talking to each other, because we've got ongoing relationships, because we're doing ongoing stewardship in the region, it basically builds certainty in our water system. And I'll explain why I think that is. So the Water Forum is actually made up of 4 different caucuses. A lot of folks who've been involved in the Water Forum, and I know some of you out here are in the audience, our logo is actually made up of 4 water drops. Everybody thinks it was just sort of a convenient, pretty thing, but those are actually 4 water drops. Each water drop representing one of our 4 caucuses. There's a water caucus, which includes water purveyors, such as San Juan Water District, Fair Oaks Water District. Yeah. Let's hear it for San Juan. Yeah. A public caucus, which includes Sacramento County, City of Sacramento, SMUD. A business caucus, includes the Metro Chamber, the Building Industry Association, and an environmental caucus, which consists of Friends of the River, the Sierra Club, Save the American River Association, Environmental Council of Sacramento. And you know, when you think about it, the Water Forum Agreement is kind of a negotiation between the enviro interests and the water and business interests. And the water and business interests are really, you know, they're in it for the same purpose. They're in business to supply reliable water supply, reliable water to industry and homes in this region, and to be able to fuel economic growth well into the future. And in some ways, the business interests, like Building Industry Association, in some ways they actually have a longer view. They're, you know, folks are out there buying property that they'll develop someday. They want to make sure when that someday comes that their water organizations, San Juan, yay, that their water districts will be able to serve them water when the time comes. And so they negotiated this truce with the enviros. The negotiation took over 6 years. They were promised by a very ambitious facilitator that they could finish it in 18 months, and it took 6 years. And in the end, they got this agreement. The agreement is based on 2 co-equal objectives. One objective is about water supply, providing reliable water supply for this region to the year 2030. The other is about environmental protection, and really focused on protecting the environment of just the lower American River. There are some other words in there about other environments outside of the lower American River, but that's really the focus. And you might have heard, if you know, there are a lot of water wonks in the room. You've read this stuff on the BDCP and the Delta Stewardship Council, and they talk about co-equal objectives. Well, the Water Forum had them first. We had the co-equal objectives first. In order to meet those co-equal objectives, they came up with a plan that included 7 elements. And those are increased diversions. I'm going to talk about these more in a minute. Dry year actions, groundwater management, water conservation, habitat management, an improved flow standard, and a Water Forum successor effort. And, you know, in the last, this agreement was signed in the year 2000, 30-year agreement, completely voluntary, does not change the scope, mandate, or requirements of any of the government agencies that signed on. And we've done a really good job of implementing 6 of those 7 elements. I would say each of them are a real success story. I'm going to walk through the ones that I think are we can just say, you know, we did a good job, and then I'll circle back to the flow standard. Oh, by the way, it was specifically mentioned, there are actually 2 items that the Water Forum Agreement addressed and said, we're going to address this by saying we'll never address them. So those folks who came together, the enviros and the water and business folks, they said 2 issues. One of them was Auburn Dam. The other was the development of the city of Folsom south of Highway 50. They said, we will never agree on those 2 issues. We will agree that within this forum, we're not going to address them. I was actually a little surprised when Ken called me and said, you want to come and talk? I figure it's like, if this was like a church, I'd be like the agnostic guy that got invited, you know, so kind of a token, right? Moving on, our first element was something called increased surface water diversions. The Water Forum Agreement says that everyone supports the idea of more than doubling the amount of surface water used in this region over a 30-year period, from 2000 to 2030. More than doubling the use. And from the enviros perspective, they didn't just agree that, okay, you know, we agree that that'll happen. They actually signed an agreement that said if any water district takes an action to meet that demand, to meet that future, the enviros will step up and support them. And they have. I know we have at least one director here from Placer County Water Agency. Our environmental caucus sent a letter to the state board about 3 years ago supporting PCWA's water conservation efforts and supporting their effort to continue to extend their water right license. So, you know, they brought them over to their side. The expectation is that we will expand our water supply, and we did for about the first 10 years of the agreement. The last few years, water use, this is surface water use in the region, has dropped off. We actually use less surface water in this region last year than we did back in the year 2000. And a large part of that reason is that per capita water use in this region has dropped significantly, dropped almost 20%. There are a lot of discussions about why that has happened. No one knows exactly. I believe it's a combination of the economy and water meters and the successful water conservation activities of our district. So if water use is sort of dropping off, is it really important for this region to continue to protect that future supply? I'm seeing nods. Yes, that is our future economic development. It's really important to continue to protect that. Another element was groundwater management. The Water Forum's role was designed to be a facilitative role. We helped each of the 3 basins in the Sacramento area develop a groundwater management plan. 3 of those basins have gone on to develop their own groundwater governance organization. The North Basin and the Central Basin actually have joint powers authority to manage the groundwater. An important thing to note about groundwater is that the Water Forum Agreement actually included numbers for sustainable yield for each of those basins. And thus far, we're operating within those numbers. Big question about whether we'll be able to do that into the future. Another action, dry year procedures. Even though everyone agreed on average we're going to increase the amount of surface water we use over the next 30 years, next 20 years now, there was also recognition that in the driest times, the driest months and the driest years, the Lower American River is particularly sensitive and particularly vulnerable. And so while the purveyors got a commitment that they could increase things on average, they also promised that in dry years they would cut back roughly to their 1995 level of water use. How do they do that? Well, they do that by doing extraordinary methods of water conservation, and they do that by switching to alternate supplies, like groundwater. And a lot of work has been done within the purveyor community in the last 10 years or so to increase the ability to use groundwater and move groundwater around within the region. Water conservation was another element. Again, for those water wonks out there, there has been a statewide approach to water conservation since the early 90s that says water purveyors in California shall implement a bunch of best management practices if they're locally cost effective. If they're locally cost effective, and that's a big out. And for a region like ours, where we're fortunate enough to have very low water costs, most of those best management practices just didn't pencil out. They just sort of washed away. Well, the purveyors in this region said, we commit to an aggressive level of water conservation, even if it's not locally cost effective. And there's been a lot of back and forth over the years about how we make that work. Ultimately, a district can't do something that's not cost effective. That would be violating the trust of their ratepayers. So there's been actually a really good success story of the purveyors working with the environmental community to find something that meets the spirit of that commitment without forcing the districts to violate the law. And I think it's been a real good success story. In fact, one of the requirements of the Water Forum is every 2 years we publish a progress report on water conservation. We published one of those last year, and what it showed was that the per capita water use in the region has been on a downward trend. It also showed that we are on track in this region, virtually every purveyor in the region is on track to meeting the 20% per capita reduction, the so-called 20 by 2020 requirements in the 2009 state law. And so, good news and good job to the purveyors in the region. Another one of our elements is habitat management, since we're trying to protect the Lower American River. Purveyors in this region collectively throw about $500,000 a year into a habitat management fund, and the green bars represent that local contribution over the last 13 years. The black bars represent private, state, and federal grants that we've been able to leverage from those activities, and we've done some really good things. I'm an engineer. I've done a lot of planning. I've done a lot of design in my time. Some of the ecosystem restoration activities that we've done in the Lower American River have been so gratifying because we go out there, we put gravel in the river to restore salmon habitat, and the next day salmon are out there building redds on that gravel. It's like we didn't just make a report and put it on the shelf to collect dust. We did something, and we did something positive, and we have immediate results. So there's this one element that we haven't completed. It's called the flow management standard. And the Water Forum Agreement said that we would complete the flow standard by 2002. We would, for the most part, adopt a set of flow rules, flow standards that were already in place when the agreement was signed in 2000, and we would tweak them a little bit and take them to the state board. After the agreement was signed, we collected some of the best scientific and fishery minds that were around, and what we found was that the flow regime that we had already been anticipating wasn't good enough. In particular, it didn't have good enough minimum flows. It was dropping the flow in the lower American River too low, too often. And it was not doing enough to protect cold water. Rob Shiptani talked about cold water pool management. The new flow standard that we've developed in concert with Bureau of Reclamation, Fish and Wildlife Service, State Fish and Wildlife Service, I'm still having trouble saying that, NOAA Fisheries, basically has a really big temperature management component. So it's all about preserving cold water, not all about, the temperature management portion is all about preserving the cold water portion of Folsom storage every year and balancing the release of that cold water throughout the season in order to protect two key salmon species, steelhead in the summer, fall run salmon in the fall. And it's a tough job. It's a tough job, and it basically requires an ongoing adaptive management report, which is factored into this flow standard that we've developed. Our flow standard was developed to be protective, durable, and enforceable. And one of the things that our colleagues at Sacramento County and the city of Sacramento who are involved directly in the Delta battles right now appreciate is that our flow standard has given them some really important, should I say the word ammunition? Yeah, some really important ammunition to engage in the Delta conversations and say, whatever you guys are doing in the Delta, don't screw up the good things we've done up in this basin. We are getting our house in order, and don't screw that up. So that ultimately this flow standard is about this region maintaining control of its own destiny. There was a set of water laws passed in 2009, sometimes people call it SB 7X7. A portion of those is now called the Delta Reform Act. The Delta Reform Act directed the State Water Resources Control Board essentially to develop flow standards on all of the major tributaries in the Sacramento River, in the Sacramento and San Joaquin River system. The State Board just issued draft flow standards for the San Joaquin River, and they're considered by most locals to be quite onerous. We're talking about a large reduction in surface water use and over-reliance on groundwater. Our approach here in this region is to wrap up this flow standard. We're currently working on an environmental impact report for that approach, and to take it to the state board and say, use this package. Don't take the same kind of onerous approach that you've taken in the San Joaquin River. Do something that is better for water supply in this region, and frankly, we can demonstrate that it's also better for environmental resources as well. So we're working on that ER right now. We just released a notice of preparation. It's out on the street now. Comment period's closing, I think, next Monday, or week or so. We hope for a public draft document in December, and that we will basically be able to stay ahead of that state board process. Again, for the purpose of maintaining control over our own destiny. What's coming in the future? Do we continue to have a water forum? I leave that question up to our governing body. I serve at their pleasure, but I do think there is more work to be done. One is, I think it's really important to finish this flow standard. I really think it is a really important thing to protect our own destiny. There is talk right now of upgrading the temperature control device at Folsom Dam. The Corps of Engineers is interested, Bureau of Reclamation is interested, SAFE is interested. We expect that, and frankly, right now the Water Forum, because we've been working on this flow standard for 10 years, right now we have some of the best technology and modeling tools available to analyze the potential benefits of upgrading the temperature control device. Oh, I left out El Dorado. El Dorado County's working on this too. We basically have a consortium of Reclamation, the Corps, SAFECA, El Dorado, the Water Forum. We're looking really hard at, can we do a hardware fix that, that helps protect the cold water pool, which in turn helps protect the water supply as well. Groundwater contamination will continue to be a worry in this region. Currently, there are indications that we've got things under control with the Aerojet project, the Mather project, but it's always a worry that those contaminated plumes will pop up somewhere else. And the members of the Water Forum have expressed to me that it's important to continue to have a water forum in place So if things pop up and one of our purveyors needs to negotiate an emergency water supply, that they can bring the enviros and others to the table and make something happen really quickly, happen in a supportable way. Reallocations and transfers, the congressman said, what was one of his truths? There's plenty of water on the earth, it's just a matter of distributing it. Well, that's true in our region as well, to some extent. There are some purveyors in this region who have ample water supplies and some who have inadequate water supplies. As we move into the future, in addition to all of the water management activities that your purveyors are investing in, the ability to move water around across institutional boundaries will continue to be important into the future. Climate change, I can't add anything to Rob Shibitani's talk, but from my outsider's view of the climate change world, here's my takeaway. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how fast it will happen. Being able to have people in this region have the ability to talk to each other and work out problems, find solutions, I think is going to be really important when sort of climate change surprises happen. And finally, I think the Water Forum needs to continue to be out there taking credit for the good work of you folks, the good works of the water purveyors, the environmental groups in this region, and singing your praises. And we try to do that whenever we can. Ken?
Thanks very much, Tom. We're a little bit ahead of schedule. By 5 minutes, does anybody have any questions for Tom?
I don't understand this water chill factor or whatever it is. I grew up in the valley before the dams. We had ranches on the Feather River. After the snow melt was gone around mid-July, the temperature of the river started going up and up. The Feather River, where we farmed, was probably 75 to 80 degrees by late summer. And now I hear all this noise about restoring all cold flow. I don't remember any snowstorms in August and September. Where is this cold water supposed to come from?
This is an excellent question. The reality is we have built dams on the rim of our valley. Those dams have blocked habitat for migrating fish, in particular salmon. We've restricted the spawning grounds of those anadromous fish by something like 70%. On the lower American River, which is our focus, in essence, we're propagating an artificial cold water fishery on the hot Central Valley floor. There have never been, at least we know about, there weren't snowstorms in July. But that's because before the dams were built, those salmonids could have moved up to Coloma and other places and found refuge where it's colder, where there are colder streams, colder ambient temperatures. In order for us to keep those species alive, we have to propagate this artificial fishery in this 23-mile stretch of the lower American River. Approximately 20% of the steelhead, that's a threatened species, in the Sacramento Basin resides and spawns in the lower American River. So it's a significant chunk of the population. The regulatory agencies and our environmental communities want us to protect those species. Whether you agree with the Endangered Species Act or not, it is currently a fact of life. And if we don't figure out a way to protect those species, their continued decline will wreak havoc to our water supplies through regulatory action. So protecting that cold water pool, creating this artificial fishery on the valley floor, it's a big part of what we've been doing. And by the way, I boat on the lower American River a lot. It's cold. That water's cold. But I know it's important to keep that fishery alive. Any other questions? Rob?
Tom, first of all, kudos to you for all the wonderful work you do on the river.
Yeah, checks in the mail, Rob.
Yeah. If we assume on long term that new storage of stream will improve the next several years, have there been any discussion with the successor effort to perhaps not only to reopen, let's say refine or update some of the PSA provisions that were originally negotiated as part of the dry-year wedge for the various filters?
If there were more storage built?
Yeah.
The question was predicated on more storage built? No. No, I I would imagine that individual purveyor organizations have thought about what those impacts would be, positive and negative, but I think the feeling among the collective group, and people say different things when they're together with the group than they do individually. The collective group, new upstream storage is so prospective, it's so far out, whether it happens or not is such a huge question mark. It's not worth the energy to talk about at this point about how we would react to that.
There's some discussions in other arenas about reintroducing the fish above this dam. That being the case, with the artificial fishery and the cold water flows below this dam, be appropriate.
Yeah. I've actually been asking this question myself, and part of what you're referring to is in a regulatory opinion in 2009, the so-called NIMS biological opinion. They ordered Bureau of Reclamation to look at the feasibility of introducing salmonids into watersheds upstream of the rim dams. And for the most part, Reclamation hasn't had the tools to really figure out what that could mean. I think it's kind of an open question. My personal opinion was that was an approach of regulators to sort of plant a thought, a thought bubble out on the horizon. If we had a fish ladder and introduced fish salmonids, cold water fish upstream of Folsom Dam, there are huge technical problems with that. Getting them up there is tough, but that's relatively easy compared to the job of collecting them and bringing them back down. And noted fisheries biologists have said, we don't know how we do it. Right? Setting aside those technical issues, I think even if you introduced cold water fish and could bypass the dam and bring them back down, the importance of this valley floor stretch of habitat isn't going to go away. And even if it does, it's not going to go away for many decades. It's kind of like when they talk about building the Delta tunnels. If we build them, they're going to solve a lot of problems, but it will be 30 or 40 or 50 years before they happen. So we can't abandon all the other pieces of management that we're working on. But my personal opinion is it will be decades before something happens, and even if it does, I think that piece of fishery will continue to be important. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tom.